Good morning, everyone. We're delighted to welcome you here this morning. My name is Ravini Kelleher. I'm an employment law partner from Johnson Winter and Slattery, and on behalf of our co-hosts, Peterberry Consulting and the Ccentric Group, we'd like to welcome you all here this morning. So this morning we're also joined by Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, who's from the US and is going to today talk to you about leadership in the digital disruption age and what to look for in our leaders. After Tomas's talk, we're going to have a panel session where Wayne Bruce from Ccentric, Shane Nealon from Peterberry Consulting, myself and Tomas will be available for questions, and we'll have a discussion about the topic. We ran this session in Melbourne on Monday, and if that's anything to go by, I can assure you that it's a fascinating and thought-provoking discussion, and well worth you getting out of bed on this cold and wet morning. So we'll make it worth your while, I'm sure. So with that, I'd like to just check that you've all got your mobile phones on silent. And can I introduce our MC for the morning, Jamie Sinclair from Peterberry Consulting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravini. I'm going to let you enjoy your breakfast for the next few minutes, but I will pop up and reappear just after breakfast. I'll do the introductions for Tomas and our panel, and I look forward to spending the rest of the morning with you. So for now, enjoy your breakfast, and I'll see you in about half an hour's time. Thanks very much. He regularly features in the Harvard Business Review and is an associate at Harvard's Entrepreneurial Finance Lab. There's a whole other list of overachievement after overachievement, which I'll skip to and talk about a little bit more about Tomas. He's about to become a father, which is very exciting for the first time, 3 or 4 months away, so that's exciting. He's a great friend to us at PBC, and we just love having him here when we can get hold of him. So he's also at the ARI conference later in the week, delivering a really important presentation there. So great that we've got this opportunity to spend a bit of time with him. So can I, without further ado, ask Tomas to join us, and I'm sure he'll hold your attention for the next 30 minutes or so. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. If you haven't finished, I hope none of this will give you indigestion. I will be talking about disruption in the leadership industry, and also try to examine some of the changing requirements and maybe specifications that we may be having right now and in the years to follow on the key leadership competencies or characteristics that effective leaders might need. Okay? And for those of you who don't know Hogan Assessments, we essentially create and validate scientific tests to evaluate leadership potential. So if you go through one of our assessments, you will get a sense of what your bright side and dark side characteristics are, what could make you a good leader, what could make you a problematic or toxic leader. And those tests are not just used for selection, but also for development. So that when you get an extensive report on effectively your personality, your style, your values, your judgment characteristics, you can work on these to get better. And PBC are our distributor here in Australia, and our most successful distributor globally, outside of the US. Which makes me think that either they're very good at selling our assessments, or Australians have a lot of psychological issues and are aware of it realistically enough to kind of go through this, and maybe we take some credit for the success of the Australian economy over the past 5 decades or so. So some of these thoughts will refer to things that might catch your attention and surprise you, because I'm going to be talking about trends that are still very unusual, particularly when it comes to disruptive technologies that are being put in place to evaluate leadership potential, and methods that are very different from the methods that we've been using in the past. So I think this quote from the science fiction writer William Gibson is very appropriate. He said, "The future is already here, just not evenly distributed." What he meant is that many of the things that might be very niche and apply only to early adopters and seem a little bit like science fiction now will eventually move towards the middle of the bell curve or the normal distribution and become the new normal, and things that are actually quite mainstream. But let's start thinking a little bit about management and leadership today. And we're in this industry where we try to apply scientific tools and knowledge to improve essentially organizations' ability to select and develop the right people for leadership and management jobs. And one of the frustrating things is that if you look at the state of affairs, the situation is pretty bleak. And I don't want to bore you with statistics about the baseline for incompetent management or incompetent leadership. Instead, I have two slides that I usually show to illustrate what most people think of their bosses, and we had to censor a few because they are, a little bit rude. So this is the censored version: what people think about their manager, what people think about their boss. You can try this in any country, in any language, and you'll get similar results. Now, there is some data that supports this as well. The Center for Creative Leadership a few years ago published a very extensive analysis of the money that is spent and mostly wasted on leadership assessment and development interventions, and B, how much confidence people have in the leadership industry. And if you want to know what a negative correlation looks like, here you have it. The more money is spent on assessing, selecting, developing leaders, the less faith people have in the industry. So what are the causes of this problem? I think it's important to discuss and examine this, because if you don't know what you're doing wrong, you won't know what the solution is or what you need to do right in the future. I think there are 4 overarching problems that cause this kind of quite negative state of affairs. The first really is that most people, and I mean managers, decision makers, including HR professionals, mostly trust their gut feeling. They make people decisions following their intuition, which, as Malcolm Gladwell said, is feelings about facts, is not the facts themselves. And this is problematic, and it's one of these interesting kind of double-edged sword phenomena that applies to psychology. Unlike in nuclear physics or quantum mechanics, when it comes to psychological matters, most people think they're experts. They think they know. People think, well, I deal with people all the time, therefore I can just trust my instincts and follow what my gut feeling tells me. And therefore you have very, very ubiquitous biases occurring in job interview processes, other selection methods, when people try to promote individuals from individual contributors to manager jobs. They make mistakes. And even in today's world, when we're supposedly encouraged to be very data-driven, and for all the conversations on big data and kind of being more empirical in our approaches to management, and the fact that scientific management has been around for over 100 years, the number one methodology that people follow to make decisions about people is intuition. Yeah? So for example, there was a survey published by the Corporate Research Forum in the UK that looked at the 300 most successful companies in Europe and asked most managers, not just HR, but most managers, how they determine whether somebody has potential for a job, whether somebody is a high potential employee, and whether somebody is promotable. 68% of respondents said, you just know. You look at someone, well, you just know, okay? And these are the most successful companies in the world, okay? And that was way more common than any validated methodology for that. So intuition, I would say, it's our biggest enemy. And second is that most people get promoted to management or leadership jobs based on their past performance. And although past performance is a good predictor of future performance, that is not the case when you change people from being an individual contributor to a manager of others. So I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the Peter effect. The idea that eventually most people rise to their own level of incompetence or mediocrity. As the joke here illustrates, one guy says to the other in the pub, "Then I made the leap from skilled labor to unskilled management." This is something that happens very frequently. A lot of the times people are selected into very prestigious and well-paid jobs that are quite technical, that involve solving problems and working, independently, and then they can only progress in their career by becoming managers. A lot of those individuals are neither interested nor able to manage people. So we should de-emphasize past individual performance and look at who can actually lead, who can motivate a team, who can engage a team. A third problem is the excessive emphasis on positive characteristics, positive attributes. Many of you will be familiar with the strengths-based movement, the strengths approach to leadership assessment and development. Comes from the United States and is part of the wider narcissistic HR movement in America. This idea that everybody is great in their own way, everybody can be a great leader, everybody has talent, don't worry about what other people think of you. If you think you're great, you are. And that's just BS. And not just that, it actually harms people because you end up with people in the wrong jobs, you end up with people being deluded or self-deceived about what they can do, and you're not helping them. As you can see, the top part of this slide comes from the Wall Street Journal. It's a year and a half old already. Since then, many firms, including Accenture, have started eliminating negative feedback from the performance management appraisal systems. Yes? So you have an employee and you can either tell them they're doing really well or you don't tell them nothing. That's a problem because we know that individuals' bright side and positive qualities or competencies often coexist with destructive or undesirable tendencies. There is no shortage of leaders who are technically brilliant and very good and they have a lot of bright side qualities, but they also derail because of their toxic personality characteristics. In our own research, we find that if you are a manager, particularly in corporate settings or environments, the probability that you're either mischievous or Machiavellian, colorful or histrionic, attention-seeking, or bold or narcissistic is 3.5 more likely, so higher than if you're an employee. And this is problematic because it shows that these undesirable features actually have an adaptive element in them. They propel people to leadership positions. They help you emerge as a leader, but people don't suddenly start being altruistic and team-oriented and high in integrity when they become leaders. They keep on being these things, which is why these stories are so common. And a final issue or problem is that even when HR practitioners are sane and coherent and well-educated and wise, they often don't have the internal influence to drive strategy and influence the C-suite. So we hear all the time that HR doesn't have a seat at the table, and this is problematic. I think the reputation of HR is not very good, and we all know that. For employees, HR works for the C-suite. For the C-suite, HR is like some kind of weird bureaucratic health and safety organism or compliance thing that defends the employees. And we know that people are the most important asset that organizations have, and actually any discussion, strategic or not, on talent management matters must be solved and led by HR. So we know that it matters, it should matter, but the reputation is problematic. Most organizations would rank HR at the bottom of the list. First they will put finance, then probably marketing, then sales, then IT. Even legal law is above HR. Okay, and that's from a reputational standpoint. So what's the solution? And I would argue that the solution is not to reinvent the wheel or the field, it's just to apply what we know about leadership properly. And Karl Popper once said that models can be useful or accurate, but are rarely both at the same time. This is an example of a model that is accurate but useless because it's so complex and it's an academic model, right? But what it shows is that there is not just a model but a lot of data and methods for connecting leadership styles and leader characteristics, attributes, both hard skills and soft skills, to measures of organizational effectiveness. And the exercise we do with organizations is pretty simple. If they can have good KPIs, good key performance indicators, good metrics of organizational effectiveness, whether they are revenues, profits, metrics around innovation, customer satisfaction ratings, then we can predict that data by looking at the profile of leaders. And we can do an analysis where we know which leaders are more likely to drive these results or outcomes. And just to give you an idea, this is not rocket science. We can't do it with 100% degree of accuracy, but if you follow the right methods and use robust models to get the results, you can achieve a multiple correlation of about 0.60. So imagine that you have two candidates, and instead of randomly deciding whom to promote, you actually put them through a thorough assessment. You will have an 80% chance of ending up with the right candidate, an 80% chance of dismissing the worst candidate of both. To put this into perspective, if we look at validity estimates or effect sizes find, even in robust medical procedures, and you look at data from the medical sciences, other social sciences, you can see that it's a lot more accurate than some things, and the effects are stronger than some relationships or correlationships that we take for granted, intuitively. And as somebody said in a recent analysis, comparative analysis of the validity of assessment methods vis-a-vis other methodologies, a visit to the dentist, a diagnosis by a dentist is on average less reliable and less valid than a diagnosis derived from psychological assessments, right? So for example, your dentist's ability to determine whether you need a root canal or not is more unreliable than what you can work out or figure out about somebody's leadership potential if you put them through a proper assessment. So what do we know about the characteristics that leaders should have, and how much of this will change? I mean, some of it won't change. Leaders, much like employees at any level or in any area, will always do better if they have three core characteristics. We call these the key ingredients of employability, and it's ability, likability, and drive. Ability doesn't just relate to soft skills, things like creativity or learning potential, or even having the ability to manage people and have people skills. It also includes technical skills. This is something that psychologists often forget. I always say, well, even if the person driving or flying your plane is charismatic and has a great sense of humor, you probably want them to be a pilot, right? So ability has to do with hard skills. We're very good at evaluating in general hard skills via people's resumes and LinkedIn profiles now, but there are also methods for evaluating generic components of ability like intelligence, IQ, good judgment, and so forth. And likability and drive are generic and depend on dispositional factors like personality. And we always say people who have 3 out of 3 will almost certainly be successful. And if you think about it, there's not that many people who have 3 out of 3. Think about employees in your firm, people who work for you, people who you come across. Can you think of many people who are not just able, but also hardworking and likable? Usually there is a trade-off, right? So a lot of people are able, but then they're a pain in the ass. Some people are not so able, but work hard to achieve that. And that's an interesting tension that we need to deal with. So when people have 3 out of 3, they're almost inevitably going to be successful. 2 out of 3, they're probably going to have a job. 1 out of 3, probably unemployed. 0 out of 3, unemployable. If you're not likable, dim, and lazy, no coach can save you. And this is generic, and the term is whether people move up from entry-level jobs to 1, 2, 3 places. When we're looking for leadership potential, we also want people to actually be ambitious, resilient, to have good judgment. I mean, the classic characteristics of leaders. And the one that has been emphasized in the last 5 or 10 years, we want leaders to be entrepreneurial. More and more organizations are interested in hiring disruptors, people who can see and exploit opportunities. There's this wonderful concept fleshed out in Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, where he talks about one of the key characteristics of entrepreneurs is reality distortion, right? To interpret events as opportunities, even if they're not. But then there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that comes with it if you can sell your interpretation of things to others. So it's interesting because more and more organizations want to hire people with an entrepreneurial mindset or profile. We can then break down these features or these key competencies and other characteristics. For those of you familiar with Hogan, we have a specific profile that pops out or crops up repeatedly when people are entrepreneurial. It's a combination of lower adjustment and high ambition. It's usually high sociability, and it's this combination of very low prudence and high inquisitive, which makes them strategic but also quite impulsive and reckless in a sense, okay? And we also know that there are certain values associated with leaders and people who are more entrepreneurial. It's quite common to see high recognition, high power, high commerce as well. It's common to see high science and aesthetics, going back to Steve Jobs. That's a profile that we see quite frequently in entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs also come with a lot of baggage. Their dark side is quite prominent. We see that they are excitable, skeptical, bold, mischievous, colorful, and imaginative. And the last two are significant because most entrepreneurial people have problems with authority. So they're very, very low on the diligent and the dutiful scale. Okay, and this is important because organizations are saying that they care about entrepreneurial people, but then most are not willing to put their money where their mouth is because entrepreneurial people are a pain to manage. Many of them are unemployable by traditional standards that wouldn't survive the corporate world. But then if instead of that you get people who are just compliant and obedient and predictable, you won't innovate, you will die. Okay, so let's just talk about disruption in the market and in the leadership assessment industry now, which is very interesting. I think the main driver of this is that although we have really cool methods to profile and evaluate leadership potential, those are really just applied to a tiny fraction of the employment market today. If you think about it, there's about 40 million assessments used every year to evaluate leadership potential. Many of those don't work, some of those are good, but 40 million is a tiny fraction of the market. There's 4 billion people who are working legally in the world today. So 99% of the market is untapped. And we can look for new technologies that are helping us evaluate more people and that potentially will enable us to find hidden gems, people who are outside of the corporate world, outside of Ivy League universities, and who might have the key ingredients for being an effective leader. We published an article on this a few months ago. If you're interested in the academic version of the talk, here it is. It's in PsyOps Journal, Industrial and Organizational Psychology, and we basically compare the new and emerging trends or methods with the old ones. So I just wanted to give you an overview of this, and I know that there's probably people in the room here who are very interested about the legal and ethical implications of these methods, which I'm sure my panelists and myself will be happy to discuss later on. So one of these interesting methodologies concerns voice and video profiling. If you think that for most, if not all jobs in the world, we still interview people and that most interviews are unreliable, invalid, and let people project their biases, it's quite interesting to consider the possibility that people will go through interviews and assessed by algorithms or computers, not by humans. There was actually a very interesting study published a couple of years ago showing that analysis of the voices of salespeople and traders and financial services professionals predicted company revenues and profits 1 or 2 years later, independently of any human assessment of these things. So what are the things that we assess when we look or develop algorithms that find physical features either in the voice or in our movement. You can see, even though you can't hear me, I had a lot of media training, so it really looks like I'm saying something really important, and you should trust me. But that's not the case. Okay? I'm better even without sound, I think. So what we look for is we actually can pick up, imagine, this is quite extraordinary, in a 25-minute interview we pick up 80 million data points. Some are quite coherently describable in the sense that we measure the frequency, volume, and pace at which you speak, how much you move, and then facial expressions, whether your pupils are elated or not, and so forth. But there's a lot of features that have no meaning, no theoretical meaning, and can't be explained, to humans. So there are attributes that are picked up. What we do then is correlate these attributes not just with future job performance, where we can tell if people have these scores or these profiles, they're more likely to perform highly in their job or other jobs, but we can also predict what interviewers will say and how they will judge those candidates. So you can completely replace current human biases, if you like, to just do the job that human interviewers are doing, or actually go beyond them and predict performance incrementally, better than people can do. Another interesting area that we've been piloting and experimenting with is mining people's public online data. Okay? And I repeat, this is public online data, so there's nothing no legal kind of, no legalities that are being kind of breached here or anything. What you can see here, I don't use Facebook very much, but this is my Facebook data. Okay, I spend about 5 minutes a week mostly watching what other people do and kind of being depressed about the state of humanity. Look at all the data that you can extract on me. I won't tell you what the red stuff is, but I am concerned by that. So what's interesting about this is that we know that there is so much data already on all of you that if that data can be translated into potential indicators or signals of talent or potential, maybe in the future we don't need you to complete an assessment. Maybe we can mine that data and give you an estimate of job fit or leadership potential. If you use Twitter, there are services that are already open source and that don't require people to log in with their account. We're working with an artificial intelligence company based in Toronto called Receptivity that translates any Twitter handle into a personality profile, including an estimate of their leadership potential. And in the future, this will happen more often. What we're missing at the moment is an algorithm that can synthesize and bridge the fragmented aspects of your digital reputation that reside in different sites or apps, right? So I'm sure most people in this room, even if they don't use Facebook or Twitter, they might use Netflix or Spotify, for sure Amazon, maybe WhatsApp, maybe Uber. And if not, as you probably know, digital marketing, programmatic marketeers have already been looking at your cookies for a number of years now, and they're translating your cookies, which is essentially the history of your browser, into a psychographic profile. Okay, so imagine if this could be done not for the purposes of serving you more relevant ads, which we still haven't seen, by the way, but apparently that is working, but to help people find a better job. And what's interesting here is that a lot of employees or consumers see this potential movement as something that will work in the benefit of organizations. But actually, it could help them get a better job, more relevant job, and you could help them get more relevant and accurate career-related feedback. Most people go into careers, vocations, or jobs and pick organizations very misinformed by what their friends, family, cousins tell them, and then they usually don't make changes or choices quickly enough or frequently enough. People are much more willing to put up with a bad job than a bad relationship, for example. We will also see in the future that the prediction of potential and leadership effectiveness will happen earlier and earlier. At the scientific level, there's already groundbreaking advancements correlating DNA markers to indicators of leadership potential. Okay? And some of you might be shocked by this, but let's not forget that there are invisible selection criteria that are operating already in society that take these things into account, and they are less fair. Okay, so we know, for example, appropriately for a talk that discusses technology, we just had a crash. We are gone. Okay, my computer might reset itself. I clearly upset the forces of the internet or something. We know, for instance, that there are factors that shouldn't be taken into account. Let me see if I can log in. That actually predict these important outcomes. Think about who gets to go to good universities. Think about the ability to predict students in university or school performance based on the parents' educational background, and so forth and so forth. So socioeconomic status is in most places an invisible marker of these things. Now you can check your phone for 20 seconds. Breakfast. Okay. I think we're back, although now the background is white, which means a different presentation, but it will be similar enough. Okay, a couple more interesting advancements. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with organizations that piloting or looking at ways in which they can not only understand individuals, but understand and map the dynamics and relationships that occur among employees and among. This is an area called social network analysis. It's been pioneered by people at MIT. It's very interesting. Initially, the studies were done in the 70s, and people were tagged with sociometric badges. So you actually put a badge on people for a few months, and then monitored who they talked to. MIT scientists coined an effect called the water cooler effect, and they realized that when certain people gather in the kitchen or around the water cooler, those people are representing usual informal but influential teams in the organization that enable ideas to flow and things to happen. So it's very interesting. And now many organizations, including Deloitte and McKinsey, are mining employees and managers' emails, not looking at their content of their communications, but looking at contextual variables around the communication, who they email more often, how often they email certain people, to predict their leadership potential. And they're even selling these services and this methodology to their clients. And I think one of the final issues or trends that we will see around this, which is happening already, is that there will be a kind of progressive diminishing of the boundaries, I would say, between your public self and your private self. And the concept of reputation, which we have embraced for a long time in organizational psychology, will become a more public measure of somebody's potential. Okay, so I'm sure you're familiar with Glassdoor, where you can more or less see now what the reputation is of influential or famous leaders in organizations. It has been crowdsourced via ratings of their team members. And that's interesting because most of the innovations that are happening in the space of HR are really at the interface between marketing and HR. Okay, so marketeers are getting hold of these data and are pushing HR to drive better practices because they know that these people and the ratings that they have in Glassdoor, which is like becoming a sort of TripAdvisor for managers, is part of the brand of the company and determines whether people want to work there and what the valuation is of the firm. So we welcome this process. Okay, so I think in the future maybe people will end up with a score that represents not just their potential fit with a job, but their generic employability or leadership potential. And what we will see more is an on-demand, a talent on-demand model being more prominent. This of course happens already in certain areas, in specific areas like in the cab or taxi industry. You can see how Uber disrupted the industry by bridging supply and demand. It's now easier in most places to find a taxi The Uber model is very nice because it also incorporates so many metrics. Think about all the information you have on an Uber driver. You have not just objective metrics on how many journeys they took, how much money they made a day, what route they took, but also customer service feedback, on how good they are or not. And if you use Uber, there's a substantial difference between a driver with a 4.6 and a 4.9. So the same thing that happens with 360s, where you think there's restriction of range and the scale is very compressed, there's a big difference between a manager who has a 5 and a manager who has a 4.7, the same with Uber. So in the future, maybe that model will be applied to other jobs. Maybe you will be able to pull out your phone and see leaders near me, managers near me, and basically source talent at leadership level based on their past 360s, their performance, and then hook up with them like with Tinder. Well, not in that same way, but and what that would mean for employees is that people will have, their talent passport or digital reputation or actual employee or manager reputation with them. If you think all that is scary, well, we haven't even talked about automation of jobs or how robots are going to take on our jobs, or 3D printing your leader and getting it delivered by Amazon drone. I think we can cover that later on. In conclusion, no need to reinvent leadership, just apply what we know works. People won't change too much, but there are certain contextual changes that are emphasizing the need for some competencies more than others or more than before. And I think the big change will come in our ability to identify and acquire leadership potential. Thank you very much. I think if people want to climb up the organizational ladder, they need to be aware of what their strengths and weaknesses are. And there's an emphasis today just on focusing on positive qualities, but really it's by fixing your mistakes and your flaws that you'll get better. And usually there are two big areas for improvements. Either you have what it takes to be an effective leader, but maybe you're too low-key, you don't self-promote, you fly under the radar, and then therefore you won't be picked. So those people I would encourage to be more politically savvy and astute and, network more, manage upwards. Or you have the other type that tends to emerge naturally, but then they can't be effective. So these are people who blow their own trumpet and are very loud, colorful, but actually they're a little bit too self-centered and not altruistic or team-oriented enough. So imagine these two groups would encompass like 80% of people. I think leaders will always benefit from having, the three main ingredients of leadership potential, which is ability, likability, and drive. However, in today's digital age, where disruption is kind of more ubiquitous, ability also includes being entrepreneurial. And being entrepreneurial means being able to operate like an entrepreneur, but inside organizations. Some people actually refer to these leaders as intrapreneurs. So they're given resources, they're left alone, and they have the ability to interpret events as opportunities, follow through proactively, and really innovation and entrepreneurship in any area is about leveraging the gap or leveling the gap between supply and demand. So there's this wonderful concept of reality distortion that was picked up by Steve Jobs' biographer that I think sums it up. Entrepreneurs have maybe an unrealistic and optimistic mindset that enables them to see things before others, but they also have the ability to sell that vision to people. Excuse me. And then one of the problems with these people is that they're often very hard to manage. Entrepreneurial people are sometimes a pain in the neck. And that's why, even though organizations say they want these people, in reality they often don't put their money where their mouth is, because it's a lot easier to hire people who are conformist, obedient, and predictable.